This guy turned around and the front of his face was missing. All he had was the bottom part of his jaw, and this guy was so on drugs, he took a knee, reloaded his AK, and took 3 steps before he dropped. And we were like, we thought we were fighting zombies.
When you join the Marines specifically because you want to train and have that training tested, you do your best to prepare so you can live up to the expectations you set yourself. During the 8 years he fought as a Marine infantryman, Stephen Cheek used every inch of that training and more, because for him, there had to be a life after the war that he could be proud of as well.
Jeremy's only 19 years old and one of my good friends, and I see a picture in the inside of his helmet of him and his wife. I knew they'd been together since high school, and man, it just hit me right in the gut. I was like, he can't die.
What is true bravery? What makes a hero a hero? Tested by the worries of what's happening at home, thousands of miles away, and the reality of what you're facing here and now. When your life is in danger every second, and it's either kill or be killed. An original podcast from Incongruity Media. This is Anthony Russo, and this is War. Sometimes you get an idea that you just can't shake. For 12-year-old Stephen Cheek, that idea was that he would be the first person in his family to join the military, and he would become a Marine infantryman. That was in the late 90s. After the September 11th attacks, he was only more convinced that he needed to join and fight. His parents had signed him up for early entry, but his joining wasn't something they were thrilled about or took lightly, especially as the war in Iraq started up. It became the dominant theme in the Cheek household.
Especially once I joined, we used to, as a family, sit there and watch. I remember the 6 o'clock news, back before it became a 24-hour news cycle. They would talk about the number of wounded and killed in action throughout the week, and sometimes they'd post the names on the little banner at the bottom. I don't know, it's a lot of mixed emotions of being able to go join, and I was nervous that the war was going to be over very quickly and I was going to miss out. I think my family was nervous at the same time, hoping that the war would be over very quickly so I would miss out. But they knew my mind was made up and nothing was going to keep me from, joining.
Cheek attended his high school graduation only because his parents insisted. In his head, he already was in Paris Island. He trained in his spare time for his career on the ground with the Marines and showed up to boot camp ready for whatever they were going to throw at him. But boot camp during wartime isn't at all what he expected, and it built him up in ways he hadn't counted on.
I think my experience in boot camp was different than maybe those a couple years before me. Some of my drill instructors had just come off of deployments. They saw the seriousness of what war was like, and so they were more geared towards teaching us instead of just, the whole kind of harassing you, break you down, build you up. We still had that aspect of it, but there was more of a teaching that came along with it because they knew exactly where they were sending us fairly soon upon graduation. The Marines are all about history, and they're teaching you the history of the Marine Corps. You're about to play a part in that. There's a war going on, and you're training for that, and no one's gonna probably actually remember your name, but you're gonna be going down in history in a phase of the Marine Corps, and that's a very exciting thing to think about.
Understanding his place as part of Marine history would turn out to be a huge motivator for Cheek. Throughout boot camp, the fact that he was part of something special never was far from his thoughts. He and the rest of the recruits had been kept up to date on what the Marines were doing in the Second Battle of Fallujah, which kicked off right around the time he got to boot camp. Mostly they were worried that they would miss the war, but by the time they got their chance, it was clear that the war was by no means over in Fallujah.
When they started opening back up the city to everybody, a lot of insurgents came in and occupied the city again, and due to the unit before us not patrolling the streets, there wasn't that security presence, so the insurgency built up again. When my unit took over, it's like we stirred up the hornet's nest again, and after a couple weeks of observing our tactics and how we would patrol, they began to really unleash things on us. Fallujah is a very, very crowded area. It's not like a city that you would see in the U.S. with these massive skyscrapers or anything, but since it's so condensed, the streets are narrow and everything. We knew something was about to happen when we go into a heavily populated area and see that whole area has been cleared out. And so we knew right off the bat to expect something. We didn't know whether to expect an IED or an ambush. So you become super vigilant, even more than what you already were. We start looking more towards the ground, honestly, just expecting an IED. And so when the machine gun burst rips off, then you're like, all right, well, it's machine gun fire. And the first thought in my head is relief. Like, all right, I don't have to watch my feet anymore. Like, I got a fighting chance. I can't fight back with an IED. But if it's some insurgent punk that's shooting at me, then, I got a fighting chance with this one. People are yelling back and forth at each other, trying to locate the fire. And that specific instance, by the time we located the fire and returned fire, everything had pretty much died off, was over. None of us got hurt. It was a very, very easy combat experience to slip into, that's for sure.
They weren't all so easy. Day to day in Fallujah, the Marines either were patrolling the chaotic streets, standing guard on the converted train station they were using for base, or acting as a quick reaction force, or QRF. Sometimes a QRF is the same thing as having a day off, but many times, especially as the Marines tried to maintain the uneasy peace in Fallujah, there was nothing further from the case.
One time it was just complete chaos. 4th Platoon had went into this building and they were doing surveillance along one of the main roads, and they stayed in the building way too long. Somehow there was a blind spot from where they were surveilling in the building where the insurgents set up an IED on an exit route that the Marines took. We had Navy SEAL team in the area that was operating as well. When 4th Platoon was leaving the building, they hit the IED. A couple of guys got shrapnel, and as soon as that happened, the squad kind of got split in half. Half was across the street already in this old car lot where they sell used cars, and a couple were in the street wounded, and then the other half was in the building still trying to get out. And then all hell breaks loose. They begin to get caught in an L-shaped ambush with machine gun fire and AK fire, and at the same time the Navy SEALs got hit. They had a wounded guy and they're trying to bring him to 4th Platoon, and 4th Platoon's calling us to come in and help them out. Our job was to get wounded out of there. We arrive and we want to set up fire superiority, which means we just want to hammer the enemy as fast as possible, put as much rounds on their position as fast as possible so we can get the wounded over to us. So for this quick reaction force, I'm not so much in a fighting forces. I just shoot as accurate and as fast as I can so the wounded can get there, and then we're gone with the wounded. You don't want to be that guy that holds up the convoy because they can't find you because you ran off. So we're returning fire like that. And we don't even get out of the truck until the wounded is there, and we get out to help load the wounded.
A less experienced headquarters platoon also had responded, but opened fire on the wrong building where the 4th Platoon had holed up. Cheek's squad were sitting back to back along the length of an old Humvee, waiting for the casualties to make it back to the truck and firing at the insurgents who had taken positions on the surrounding rooftops as part of the ambush.
So we start exchanging fire with the enemy, and the Navy SEALs are coming the back way through trying to bring their wounded. So 4th Platoon had got some of their wounded in the center of that building. It's just pure chaos. They're working on the wounded in the center of the building. Half of their team's outside an abandoned car lot. You have headquarters shooting at the Marines. You have the insurgents shooting at the Marines. You have us trying to de-escalate some of this. And then here comes the Navy SEALs with one of their wounded. 4th Platoon has set up a booby trap on the back door with a stun grenade and a smoke grenade. They come through the back door, which was booby trap, so they hit a stun grenade, which the first two guys, they get stunned and they're dazed and confused and they don't know what happened. Then they hit the smoke grenade, which begins to fill up the whole entire building with smoke while they're sitting there trying to work on their wounded. And I remember the craziest scene. Sergeant Matter was a squad leader, and this dude was an animal. One of the craziest, toughest Marines I've ever met. Sergeant Matter had taken shrapnel from the initial IED blast right in the face. So he's bleeding down his face. It missed his eye because he was wearing his eye protection, and Copley had got shot in the butt. Sergeant Matter is carrying Copley, and Sergeant Matter takes a round through the thigh and then a round through the neck, and he comes over and drops off Copley in our Humvee. And Sergeant Matter's just laughing, and we're looking at him like he's a lunatic. He's literally running across the street carrying Copley, and he's got blood pouring down his face. He takes 2 rounds to the body, and he rips open his camis, and he looks down at his thigh and sees, that the bullet missed his tattoo. And we're saying, Sergeant Matter, you got to come with us. You're wounded. And he's like, I'm not leaving. He just runs back off into the abyss, back into the crazy firefight.
With the wounded secured and the firefight starting to turn, Cheek and the rest of his squad brought the casualties back to base. There's always some satisfaction and excitement after a firefight where the casualties were minimal. Guys took shrapnel and a couple got shot, but everyone was up and around again in a couple of days. As 2005 turned into 2006, things would get worse in Fallujah, and they would get worse for the Marines. Cheek would be reminded that hard-won knowledge from setbacks is as much a part of the Marines' history as were any acts of communal valor. But the incident from January 7, 2006 is the one that gave him the greatest amount of perspective about his place in the Marines and the Marines' mission in Iraq.
We were going back to Camp Bahariya, where they had some satellite phones we were going to be able to use. And 1st and 3rd Squad were going to go out and patrol that morning. And then, we were all going to rotate. And as we get there, I remember them saying, hey, we're going River City. And River City is someone has either been hurt or killed in the area. I remember Staff Sergeant Ray pulls up in a Humvee, and he comes running out, and you can tell he's kind of crying a little bit. And he comes up with my squad lead, and they're like, hey, we got to go. I'm like, all right. He says, first platoon or 1st Squad and 3rd Squad, they've been hit. They've taken some casualties. We're going out there. We're going to go help them. We're in the back of this high-back Humvee, open top. I don't really know what's going on. We're speeding down the road. I mean, we're trying to blow through checkpoints on Camp Bahariya. You could hear fire just intensifying the closer that we got. And then right before we're about to get there, I remember our commanding officer called us off, and he said, no, come back to base. Staff Sergeant Ray stops the Humvees in this alley. We're mad. We're trying to understand, why are we getting called off? This is our platoon. So we get back, and they're actually there by this time. So I remember seeing one of my best friends. We still talk every day to this day, Jonathan. I remember seeing him tear it up. A lot of my senior guys who you think, as a junior guy, you think they're invincible, and you see these guys, just huddled up, kind of crying. And then that's when it kind of hits you all right, it's a lot worse than what maybe we had thought. Then you start noticing guys aren't there. I see, my friends like Jared Jacobs isn't there. I'm like, where's Jared at? And everyone's just staring at me with a blank face. And it's not until couple hours later, when you give these guys their space, that you start finding out what really happened.
No amount of satisfaction after a victory compensates for losing guys. Even when you gain extra experience and knowledge, as Cheek would, it is a paltry payoff. Worse, there is no good solution or retaliation, only anger to be tucked away for next time. It was January 2006, and with the war now turning into something that looked a lot more like an occupation, attacks on U.S. forces increased as the Al-Anbar province continued its descent into violence. Hearing the story of how the fight went down did nothing to take the Marines' minds off of just how dangerous the mission they had taken up.
We faced a lot of sniper fire on that deployment, and that was the worst. We had this sniper team that just kept harassing us the entire deployment. And as they were patrolling, Corporal Lundstrom was shot by a sniper. He was killed instantly. He fell down into the middle of the street. And as the squad's trying to gather their bearings, trying to see what happened, everyone just darts. You move and take cover, and they had found a door that opened up to a house. The Marines start running into that house and trying to set up security and start making a plan to go out there and go grab Lundstrom. As they're doing that, Carnes and a couple other guys start laying down a base of fire. Jared goes out there to go grab Lundstrom, and Jared gets shot as he's trying to drag him, and Jared is killed as well. And then our Doc Ingalls goes out there, and he starts dragging one of the guys, and he gets shot as well. Goes through his right arm, comes out his arm, goes through his chest, comes out his chest and goes into his left arm and comes out, and luckily it was so far forward it just went through all muscle and missed. By this time, 4th Platoon came out there as a quick reaction force. 3rd Squad was trying to reach them, but 3rd Squad got pinned down with a sniper fire and machine gun fire. They were only a couple blocks away, and they couldn't reach them. 4th Platoon comes out there as QRF, and as they're coming out there, PFC Brown was coming around the corner, and another sniper shot him and killed him instantly as well. So 4th Platoon gets stuck, and they're trying to load him in one of the vehicles, and that vehicle gets shot and disabled. And man, this scene was just pure chaos. Marines trying to get closer and closer, to the Marines that are down, and this one squad of 8 guys been dwindled down to 4. Corporal Erickson got shot in his sappy plate. Your entire squad gets cut in half within 30 seconds, and you can hear the fight all around you, and it's building up and no one can reach you. Didn't even take that long. Whole battle was over very quickly.
All that was left for Cheek and the rest of his platoon was anger and outrage, and dealing with that took effort and perspective.
Our captain calls off patrols for the rest of the day, and Marines were very, very mad about that, because all you want is revenge. I mean, to be quite honest, you just want to annihilate the city. You don't care. You just want revenge. You want someone to pay. And in retrospect, looking back, not as a 19-year-old kid anymore, I think the captain made the right call, because he knew exactly what we wanted to do when we didn't have the upper hand at that point. And I think that's where all the anger came from, is, we're Marines. We trained for this. We overwhelmed the enemy. We always win. And that day, we didn't have the upper hand. And it's a very humbling experience. I'm still hot about it now, if that makes any sense. You also know that there are people in that city that needed our help. We interacted with the civilians a lot, and the insurgency was just as cruel to them, but they couldn't protect themselves like we could. They didn't have training. They didn't have weapons, So you don't blame them. We're there to protect and help them. No, you don't make stupid decisions like that. No one ever did. You want to. But at the same time, you realize it's not going to do any good. It's not going to bring anybody back.
So they waited. They did their jobs, and then the Marines were finally slated to go home, although Cheek didn't believe he was going home until his feet touched American soil.
You don't focus on going home, because even though you're 3 days away, you gotta make it 3 more days. And if you start getting in that mindset and drop your guard, then you're not going home. Therefore, you have no decompression time. We go straight from fighting on our very last day to in America a couple days later, and we turn our weapons in at the armory, and they got us in formation, and we're marching down the road to this field house where all of our families are at, and the streets are lined, and they're holding up signs for you, and you hear people cheering, and you feel proud and guilty. I mean, you're proud that you get to come home, but you're guilty because you came home and others didn't. And the guys that didn't come home, their families are there too. And they know their sons aren't there, but they're there to still support us. It's very hard to see some of your friends' parents there when your friends aren't the ones coming home. I went back to South Carolina, went home, saw my parents and saw my family, and they want to know what's going on, and they've been watching the news, and it's not that they're desensitized to it, but they don't. It's a whole different story watching it on the news and seeing the numbers and the names come across the screen than it is, that number or name was your friend that was laying in the street. You don't really feel like talking about it at that time. So I grew up a preacher's kid, and lived a pretty conservative life. Never drank before in my life, and that's how I spent my time off, was alcohol. You just buy massive amounts of alcohol with your friends and try to process things. So you just try to focus on, these guys didn't make it, and for some reason I did. I need to get as much life in as possible for the both of us, because at the same time, you're deploying again, right back to it.
There were a couple of upsides on the new deployment. First, he was a senior guy now, a squad leader who could help orient the new Marines to the reality of 21st century warfare. Cheek was proud of and impressed by the senior Marines during his first deployment, but the reality was that they were in many cases using Vietnam-era tactics that were situated someplace between ineffective and counterproductive. For example, rather than using suppressive fire to retrieve the dead or wounded, the Marines now relied on massive amounts of smoke canisters. The Iraqi police also were a new wrinkle. Although they were nowhere near as well trained and equipped as the U.S. forces, Cheek found them enthusiastic about fighting off the insurgency. More important, they played a significant part in what would turn out to be one of the biggest wins for the Marines on Cheek's second deployment.
And Staff Sergeant Ray says, hey, he said there's a factory in the heart of Fallujah. They're making, vehicle-borne IEDs, and we're going to go hit this factory. And so the whole plan was our little 6-man Marine team was going to go hit this guard shack. Supposedly there was an insurgent guard shack like about a block away, a lookout that was supposed to blow this factory if Marines or coalition forces came near it. Well, like everything else in the Marines, the intelligence is always wrong. So we get to this compound, and instead of it being the guard shack, it is the actual factory that they sent my team to. At first, we don't know that we are actually walking into a major ambush.
The massive compound had seen better days. 3 buildings were laid out in an L shape with an unguarded gate in the front and a hole in the rear from a previous incursion. The 6-man Marine squad split up into 3 teams: Cheek and Carnes, Staff Sergeant Ray and Hudson, and Geen and Campbell. More than enough for the triggerman, but woefully underprepared to run into the more than dozen insurgents inside the factory. As they were walking around, Cheek and Carnes noticed wires coming out of an old donkey cart and leading into the building. When they went to follow the wire, all hell broke loose.
As I look up to the rooftop of this 3-story building, I see about 6 or 7 insurgents lean over with AKs, and I can't even get the words out to give Carnes a heads up before they just start raking fire down on us. I take off running to the corner of the building. I see Carnes take off running right beside me. I hear Carnes scream, and he falls down. By this time, I'd made it to the corner of the building. I was like, I gotta go back for him. I don't have a smoke grenade or anything on me to cover my movement, and I'm separated from everybody. And as soon as I turn the corner to go back for Carnes, I make it about 5 or 6 steps, and I bump chest with him. He had just fallen down. He had tripped and screamed when he had tripped. Scared me to death. And at the same time, other insurgents start pouring out the back of the building where Gunny Ray and Hudson were at. And as Gunny Ray and Hudson are turning the corner, they bump chest with 2 insurgents. Like literally bump chest with them. And the insurgents, their guns jammed. And Gunny Ray and Hudson shot these guys probably about 20 times apiece, right in the chest. Me and Carnes start fighting our way back over to where they're at.
The compound backed up to 800 meters of open trash field, and the insurgents made for the broken part of the wall there, intending to escape. They had the Marines dead to rights, outmanned 2-to-1 with the element of surprise and the high ground, but they were also drugged up on khat, a leaf that had kind of an amphetamine effect, and probably were way too jumpy to think that clearly.
So they started to egress across a 800-meter trash field, and man, we just picked them off. I remember we're laying beside 2 of the dead bodies that Gunny Ray and Hudson had shot, firing on the rest of their friends, but all these guys were on khat. And I remember this one guy was running across the field, and me and Carnes were shooting him in the bottom of the back and then the back of his legs. And I remember Geen walked up a machine gun burst straight from the bottom of this guy's spine to the back of his head. I could very clearly see in my scope, this guy turned around and the front of his face was missing. All he had was the bottom part of his jaw, and I remember specifically just seeing his teeth, and that's all I could see. And this guy was so on drugs, he took a knee, started unloaded his AK, reloaded his AK, and took 3 steps before he dropped. And we're like, we thought we were fighting zombies. The 2 bodies that Staff Sergeant Ray and Hudson had originally shot, we didn't know what the heck was going on. They were reaching for something in their pocket, and we shot them again. They caught fire, and I come to find out, of the 12 bodies we recovered, 7 of them had suicide vests on, and one of our tracer rounds had caught his vest on fire. So the Iraqi police came in, and it ended up being one of the largest vehicle-borne suicide factories found in Iraq to this date.
It was a huge victory for the Marines, or at least for their morale. The Iraqis got credit for the mission, but they wouldn't let the Marines take the bodies, opting instead for a public display of just what the new Fallujah was going to be like if they had any say about it. The Iraqi soldiers gutted the 12 dead insurgents and hung them from the street posts. It didn't do a lot to quell the violence in Fallujah, but it did encourage the Marines by showing them just how fed up the Iraqi army was with the insurgency. So much of the time between battles is waiting that it's easy to lose track of how much danger really is out there. But even when you're in the middle of a city racked by violence, doing your best to set aside the threat in your mind for just a couple minutes at a time is an important way to stay sharp without getting overwrought. But in Fallujah, in 2007, those minutes were few and far between.
We had this one building that we occupied in the center of Fallujah. It would be a whole squad of us, so 13 or 15 Marines. I was a team leader at this time, and I remember one of my guys on my team, Jeremy Brooking, he was relieving me on post. I'm coming down off the roof to go play cards with some of the guys, Staff Sergeant Ray and some of the other guys downstairs, and not 15, 20 minutes has passed, and we hear a loud smack. It sounded like a bullet had just hit the wall, like right beside me. And then I remember hearing a machine gun on the roof start opening up and them start yelling that Jeremy was hit. Didn't have any gear on, ran upstairs with Corporal Metter, and we start crawling across the roof, and Jeremy's trying to crawl to us a little bit. He's kind of reaching out. I drag him down off the roof. I drag him down the stairs to the story that we were on. I began cutting away his clothes, and the first thing we do is we take off his vest, and we see a hole in his plate. So I'm looking around, and I don't you know, he's not even really bleeding much at all. And I see a little indentation in the top part of his chest, a little bit of blood, not much at all. I mean, it wouldn't even fill up like a cap to a Coke. And so I'm telling him, I was like, no, there's the bullets in him. They don't believe me, and I see he's turning pale.
The consensus was that a piece of his plate had been chipped off and that Jeremy just had the wind knocked out of him, but that didn't feel right to Cheek. First off, there was bulletproof glass up on the rooftop lookout. Second, the Marine should have started to come around by now if it was just a minor injury. Already halfway through his second tour in Fallujah, Cheek had seen a ton of gunshot wounds and treated a bunch of people in the field. He cut open the man's vest, saw that there was a hole in the sappy plate and no exit wound on Jeremy's back, and knew what he had to do.
I start treating him for a second chest wound. His chest starts wheezing. And I went to a few of the medical classes, and I think his lung was starting to collapse, so I start doing what they say to do. I start taking plastic and I put it over his wound and start taping it off. And as I'm doing that, I'm trying to keep him calm. He takes off his helmet while I'm working on him. As he throws his helmet on the ground, or as someone throws his helmet on the ground, I see a picture inside of his helmet. Jeremy's only 19 years old and one of my good friends, and I see a picture in the inside of his helmet of him and his wife. I knew they'd been together since high school. And man, it just hit me right in the gut. I was like, he can't die. So I take that picture out of his helmet and I hand it to him. I tell him just focus on that. And QRF gets there with a medevac Humvee. Jeremy gets put in the Humvee. I guess he flatlined on the ride there. And then he flatlined again. When he went into surgery, he ended up making it. He had a couple of surgeries, had to have part of his lung taken out. He still deals with a ton of problems right now. You know, at the moment, it's just all training and adrenaline. You're sitting there, you know, you're not thinking about this as your friend. You're not thinking about what's gonna happen. You're just focused on the problem that's at hand. But when I saw that picture fall out, it became real. And so you try to just put it in the back of your mind. I mean, heck, half the reason I handed him the picture so I didn't have to look at it, so I keep my mind straight, just get it out of my view so he can look at it.
Cheek already had something of a reputation for field medicine, so sometimes he was referred to as an honorary corpsman. In reality, though, it just tied back to the seriousness with which he performed his duties. He says he just happened to be lucky enough to be paying attention when they learned about sucking chest wounds in combat medical training, but the truth is deeper than that. Cheek liked being a Marine, and he liked being good at it. when he had the chance to go to Afghanistan as an advisor, helping another unit train up the Afghan National Army, it was just another challenge to relish.
I was very excited about this deployment. We were finally getting to go to Afghanistan. It was going to be my 4th tour overseas. We're patrolling around and we get caught in an L-shaped ambush. It starts off with RPGs getting fired at us and then machine gunners opening up on our flanks. And it was during the rainy season. It was terrible, man. It's like trying to fight on a Stairmaster. You're just in flooded fields and you got mud past your ankles, halfway up your shin. There is no cover. You're just in an abandoned, cleared out field. There are about ditches every 50 yards, and you're trying to make your way to a ditch, and you're trying to high step it through this mud while you're being shot at. It's miserable. The ambush dies off really fast, only lasts a couple of minutes. And so we're walking back to the base. This kid in front of me, Lance Corporal Rackenthal, I didn't know him. I didn't know most of these guys. I just got attached to Kilo. Lance Corporal Rackenthal stepped on a booby-trapped IED right in front of me. And I remember everybody wanted to rush to him right off the bat. And I had to tell him, no, you don't want to rush up to him because these little toe popper IEDs were everywhere. I slowly work up to Rackenthal, and he's missing the bottom part of his right leg right off the bat. Part of his right arm's barely hanging on. His left leg's barely hanging on. So I'm trying to put tourniquets on him. And normally guys like this, suffering that much trauma, they'd at least be passed out. But Rackenthal wasn't passed out. He's sitting there screaming. And the whole time, all he's screaming is for is a Dr. Pepper. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I guess it's just the trauma. I put 4 or 5 tourniquets on Rackenthal to stop all of his bleeding. The whole time he's just yelling at me. He's like, give me a effing Dr. Pepper right now. Just cussing at me, just screaming for a Dr. Pepper. I'm just sitting there trying to talk to him. I was like, dude, I don't have a freaking Dr. Pepper, man. Like, we're in the middle of Afghanistan. You just got blown up. Like, there's no freaking Dr. Pepper. So first time I ever saw the dude, and this is the last time I ever saw him. The only conversation we ever had was, I'm scared he's about to be a triple amputee and he's yelling at me for a Dr. Pepper. I talked to some guys who keep in touch with him, and he's doing good.
Afghanistan was a completely different animal from Iraq. The enemy stayed to fight more often, and the soldiers were more experienced on both sides. Working with the ANA was a dicey proposition, though, especially for Cheek. As an advisor, he had fought alongside some of the best the ANA had to offer, but working with that army could still be something of a crapshoot.
Not only do you have to train them and your life's in their hands and they don't speak your language, but you're also trying to keep the peace between the Afghan army and the Marines. There were some guys in the Afghan army that they weren't the best. And I'm about to go do a mission with my buddy Jonathan's platoon. I think he was 2nd platoon. And I had suspicion of this Afghan army platoon commander because normally I wouldn't tell anybody. I would set up the patrols, but as part of training them, I had to start showing the platoon commander how to plan out patrols and patrol routes and everything. And once I started doing that, I always got ambushed. So I tell that Marine platoon commander, like, hey, I'm pretty sure my ANA platoon commander is Taliban. So we set up a trap. We made up a fake patrol route, and he says we're gonna actually go a different way and see if he set up an ambush for us and see if we can come in behind that Taliban and everything. And so I tell him this is the route. That morning before we go to step out, I was like, hey, the Marine lieutenant changed up things, and the ANA platoon commander got very upset, very mad at us that he was out of the loop, that things had got changed up. And sure enough, man, we snuck up behind this ambush that he had set for us. And so when we get back, I confront him, and he gets very mad. He pulls out a pistol and he's pointing at me and the Marine platoon commander, and some of the Marines raise their rifles at him, and the other ANA don't know what's going on. So a couple of them raise their rifles at the Marines, and we're like this, Mexican standoff. Everyone's got guns just pointed at each other, but some of the ANA knew that he was Taliban, and one of them snuck up behind him and hit him over the head, knocked him out. We arrested him. By that time, the other ANA, when they saw their own guys do that, they put their weapons down. We told them what was happening. I never had a problem again. We all had a good working relationship after that. We ended up finding out that he was high-level Pakistan Taliban that had came over to Afghanistan to infiltrate the ANA. I'd been shot at multiple times, and I'd cleared houses in Fallujah and stuff, but to be held up like that, no, I'd never had something like that happen. There's a little bit of fear, but the fear comes afterwards. When you look back on it, you're like, man, at any point in time, that dude could have shot me. But at the same time, your initial reaction is just anger. You're like, man, this dude's gonna try to shoot me. Like, this is messed up. Like, yeah, it's not a fun situation.
Cheek was in Afghanistan again as part of his re-up, which was a combined effort to be able to earn a living again as the U.S. economy collapsed in 2008 and to keep his marriage together. The second aspect of that plan failed, and by 2012, Cheek was no longer married. In fact, he wasn't going to be a Marine much longer either.
I was going to stay in and be a drill instructor, but in 2012, there was a lot of Marines that weren't allowed to stay in the Marine Corps anymore. They just didn't let us re-enlist. It's all I'd known since I was 18. I wanted to do it at least for 20 years so I could retire. It was tough at first, but then as soon as I got out and tasted freedom, I was okay with it. While I was over in Afghanistan, I applied to a college and got accepted, and big career change. So I went from 8 years, 5 deployments, Marine infantry to I'm an associate pastor now at a church here in Louisiana. So my undergraduate degree was in Christian ministry, and honestly, my faith is what got me through those 5 deployments too. I'd walked away from God, especially during my first and second deployment. I was trying to reconcile things and got heavy into alcohol for a couple of months there. That's definitely what I held on to, and especially when I got out and I see friends struggling. I lost 27 friends, close friends, during those 5 deployments, and I'm almost close to that number right now with how many friends have committed suicide from the Marines as well. And I really try to reach out to guys and let them know, like, there's more out there. There's no sense in it. Struggling with this depression or, PTSD, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. Like, you have to be proud of your service. You have to appreciate what you did. But at the same time, we all knew what we were signing up for. Like, I joined the Marines to fight. I didn't join to protect America. Yes, when I saw the Twin Towers in 10th grade get attacked, I was very angry. But at the same time, let's be realistic that people from Iraq weren't going to come over here on big warships and invade America and start a battle over here. I joined the Marines to fight. I trained, and I wanted that training to be tested because I wanted to know if I could handle it. When I was over there, I fought for the guys to the right and to the left of me. No one was going to North Augusta, South Carolina and killing Stephen Cheek's family. And I fought so my brother and my sister or kids later down the road wouldn't have to fight. You do it, and then you go back into the shadows. We're not owed anything. I don't see any point in dwelling on my past service. It's in the past. I keep the memories of all my friends that died. I keep those memories alive, but the best years are still ahead of me. I'm not going to live another 60 years and be like, and reminisce on the days of when I was 22 years old. That's a sad life to live, because I've met so many guys that have moved forward and done even better and greater things with their life too.
People often join the military to get a sense of being part of something larger than themselves. But it is the attitude of service, the spirit of excellence that makes up that something larger. Stephen Cheek is working on his doctorate of ministry and continuing to strive to stay part of something bigger, to strive for personal excellence, and to serve something larger. Next time on This Is War.
And it wasn't 1 or 2. It was the entire village was coming out onto the street, and I'm running down the middle of it. They were closing in around me.
Are you a combat veteran, or do you know one with a story to tell? Reach out to us at stories@thisiswar.com with your dates and branch of service and a brief description of the experience that you'd like to share. This Is War was written by me, Anthony Russo, and produced by Incongruity Media. If you like the show, you can help support us by visiting our sponsors or by leaving a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. You can also follow us on social media at This Is War.